Welcome. I'm Lonnie Skrentner, the president of the Edina League of Women Voters. This is the candidate forum for State House District 49B. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit volunteer organization that encourages voter-informed and citizen participation in government. Our co-sponsors tonight are the Jewish Community Action and the National Council of Jewish Women, Minneapolis chapter. I'm totally doing the intro over. I apologize to those of you who have been here for the whole time. Our league does studies, takes stands, and we advocate on issues. We do not endorse or support any political candidate or any political party. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters. The sponsorship of this forum is not an endorsement by the League of any candidate. Our forums are videotaped and rebroadcast on local channel 16. They are also on YouTube, the City of Edina website, and the local league website. Our moderator for tonight's forum is Alice Moorman, who is from the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. Alice.
Thank you. Before we get started, would you all take out your cell phones and please turn them off or put them on silent. Thank you. Thank you for attending this evening. This forum is being sponsored by the League of Women Voters Edina, Jewish Community Action, and the National Council of Jewish Women, Minneapolis chapter. The purpose of this evening's forum is to provide an opportunity to hear the candidates for Minnesota House District 49B discuss issues that are important to you. We will try to cover as many issues as possible in the time we have. If your questions are not addressed tonight, feel free to contact the candidates directly. All candidates who filed for office and who will be on the November 8th ballot were invited to this forum. I would now like to explain the rules and format of tonight's forum. Speaking order was assigned before the forum and will rotate with each question. Each candidate will have 1 minute to make an opening statement and 2 minutes to answer a question that was sent out in advance. Candidates will then have 1 minute to answer each question submitted by the audience. Candidates will each have 1 1/2 minutes to make a closing statement, or maybe a little bit more, depending on how we go with the questions. League volunteers will time candidate responses and indicate to candidates when they have 1 minute remaining, 30 seconds remaining, and when they must stop. Audience questions must be in writing and handed to a volunteer who is wearing a league button. The moderator, that's me, will ask all questions. League of Women Voters Edina determines which questions will be asked and attempts in good faith to cover the topics of interest indicated by the submitted audience questions. All written questions become the property of the League of Women Voters Edina. This forum is being video recorded. Please hold your applause until the end of the forum. So we will start with an introduction of the candidates, and they will have 1 minute each. And we will start with Paul Rosenthal.
First of all, thank you. Thank you to the League for putting on this event. It is a great event, and thank you all for coming out tonight. And I also want to say thank you to my family, my wife Liz, and my son Jack and Eddie, who are in the audience. It's really for them why I ran and why I continue to run. It's been a privilege to serve the people of Southern Edina, Western Bloomington, and portions of Eden Prairie and Minnetonka in the State House. I fully believe that this state is on the right track, and we have one of the best states to live, to work, to raise a family, and to, just be ourselves. We're way ahead of other states. Our unemployment rate is low. Our crime rate is low. And I think we've done a really good job navigating through the really hard times of the last few years. So thank you for your support, and I hope to continue to be able to represent you.
Thank you. Max Rymer.
Hello, everybody. My name is Max Rymer. I have been in the district with my wife, Elsie, for the past 3 years. This isn't the economy of old, so I do a number of different things for a living. I'm the owner of 2 small businesses. One is a full-service digital marketing and web development company called Digital Alchemy. My business partner, Sam, is in the room tonight. Thank you, Sam. And I also have developed a commission-sharing software called Bird Dog. In addition to that, I founded a nonprofit called the Edina Foundation, which grants scholarships to Edina high schoolers based on entrepreneurial success as they enter college. I'm an expecting father. My wife, Elsie, is due February 25th. We are just elated by that. And one of the reasons I'm running is also for the future that my children have in Minnesota as well. So I'm excited to be here tonight. Thank you to the League for putting on this event. I'd like to have a lot of fun, so we're going to have some fun during this event, all right? The last one was a little lackluster, so.
Thank you. Mr. Rymer, I'd like you to answer the first question that was sent to you before, and I will read it. Explain why you would or would not support restoring the right to vote to citizens living in the community on probation or parole due to a felony conviction.
So this is a very interesting issue. It kind of strikes at the heart of what we really think justice is in Minnesota and in America. Is justice a punitive thing, or is it more of a restorative and reintegration thing? Now, I tend to be on the latter. I think that once somebody has served their time, I'm a grace person. I'm grace-centered in my life. You know, I'm easy to forgive and easy to forget. So it's one of those things that I think that the legislature should operate in a very similar way when it comes to criminal justice. When somebody serves out their time, and I tend to think part of that time is the probation period, so let me clarify on that. But once those periods are up, somebody should be able to be rehabilitated and reintegrated into our society in Minnesota and therefore have the right to vote like every other citizen. I think that's the whole point of our justice system. So this is an issue I'm pretty passionate about. And one of those, and it's really a thing that I think should be taken seriously in the legislature. So all that to be said, I do think that voting rights, as well as many other rights, should be restored once somebody is done doing their time.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you. You know, I serve on the Public Safety Committee, and this is something that did not come up this year, although we had plenty of bills submitted. We did not get a hearing on any of them. I sort of am on the same page with Max with a slight difference. I do believe if someone is deemed safe enough to be out in the community, that we should do all we can to integrate them into society and make them feel part of society. It will reduce recidivism, and ultimately it's like early education. The earlier we get to these people, make them feel at home on the outside, get them living a life of on their own after being in jail, I think that's a good thing. So yes, I would be in favor of giving them the right to vote.
Thank you. And now we'll be going to the questions from the audience, and you'll have a minute to answer. And the first one is to Mr. Rosenthal. Over $700 million of surplus revenue was left on the table at the end of this year's session. If elected, what would you advocate for these funds?
First of all, those numbers are wrong, and I'll tell you why. When they calculate the state budget surplus or deficit, and I've had a bill in since I've been there to correct this, they include inflation on one side of the equation, but not on the other. And so it's really about half that amount. It's about $400 million, not the $900 million we keep hearing about. Still a great deal of money, though. I'm in favor of putting as much away as we can for a rainy day. The good days, I hope, continue for a long time. And but I don't want to go through the years of having to cut and cut and cut till people were really miserable, and school districts were going unfunded. We actually borrowed money from our school districts to pay our bills. That's not a way to run a government or a state. So I would be open to some property tax reductions. But overall, I think we have to look at it very, very carefully, and we have to look out into the future to make sure that we have enough money to keep going.
Mr. Rymer, and I will ask the question in the amended version.
Okay.
There is a surplus in revenue, what was left on the table at the end of this year's session. If elected, how would you advocate those funds?
Well, truth be told, there was actually a whole heck of a lot of money left on the table at the end of this past session because, frankly, our session, we didn't get anything done, right? There was a lot of bipartisan bickering. Paul sent out an email to all of us. I'm part of Paul's constituency currently. And he mentioned that they did not have a deal that they could get done or that was agreeable. Well, unfortunately, along with our surplus, we actually did have a deal in place that had 95% support in the legislature. It just so happened that our governor came to the table at the last second and had some, I guess, bridges that he couldn't cross magically out of nowhere as part of the deal. So there's a lot of different things that we could do, including tax breaks, funding our transportation and infrastructure needs in the Twin Cities, and then really using the rest of that money to make small businesses' lives easier and easier to operate in this state of Minnesota. So there's a number of different things that I would do with the $400 million to $900 million surplus that we had.
May I respond to the revised question?
Pardon?
May I respond to the revised question?
Sure.
If you want to talk about what was on the table this year, I'm glad that you're on my email list, but we did have a deal, especially on transportation, with the House, the Senate, and the governor. My best friend in the legislature happens to chair that committee, and he came to that agreement. The Speaker of the House at the last minute took that bill away. This representative, who shall remain nameless, called me on the phone on the last day of session and said, Paul, if the Speaker brings up a transportation bill, I want you to get up and start talking and don't stop until I get there. He was at a confirmation. And people that know me, I don't talk unless I absolutely have to, or unless I think people talk enough as it is. And so while you may be on my email list, you weren't there for the last day, and it was something else. If you'd like me to explain it to you, I will.
And Max Rymer, I'll give you a chance to make another comment on that if you want to.
Certainly. So I really didn't hear that story on the email list, which would be really nice to have a little bit more transparency and communication as a constituent in 49B. So what Paul just said really didn't encapsulate what we were communicated to about. What we saw from the public's point of view is we had some good legislation that was on the table. The Star Tribune, in fact, about a month ago, wrote about how much good legislation we had as part of that bonding package that did not get passed. So the only communication that we had was seeing we had something in place, and then we didn't because of certain demands that the governor made. So that was really the only communication that we had as part of 49B.
Thank you. And Mr. Rymer, you can answer this question first. Social Security income is taxed more in Minnesota than by the federal government. Shouldn't it be the same? Why or why not?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Social Security income is taxed more in Minnesota than it is by the federal government. Shouldn't it be the same? Why or why not?
Well, I happen to be of the mind that I think it's unfortunate that you can really put your money into a system and work your entire life with the expectation that the system will be there for you. We actually have a little bit of an issue, especially within our Edina precincts in the district, of people leaving the state because of certain tax climates and certain pieces of the Social Security and retirement taxes that we have in this state, where they are actually leaving the state because there are other states that don't tax Social Security at all. So I tend to be of the mind that we shouldn't, I do think it's a little bit immoral that we tax Social Security when people have worked their entire lives to put into a system and expect the system to be there. So all that to be said, I would be for actually a lesser tax burden than what the entire nation taxes.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal?
No, I tend to agree with Max. I think it is outrageous, and I'm a co-author of many bills to get to the federal level on Social Security, but also on other issues, the estate tax being one of them. Currently in Minnesota, the estate tax deduction is, that floor is 2.5 million. The federal is 5 million, and I'm co-author of a bill also to raise that. So I think, you know, we need our seniors and people who depend on Social Security to have as much money coming in as they can.
And the next question is about MNsure. Mr. Rosenthal, what can we do to improve it, to improve MNsure?
Well, obviously we have to improve it, but there's many things we can do. First of all, only 5% of the population are self-insured, but their rates are skyrocketing, and they have been skyrocketing before the Affordable Care Act, and they continue to skyrocket now. So I would advocate for more competition within the marketplace, as long as we realize that the good things that are in this, the ACA continue, like keeping your children on your insurance till you're 26, covering diseases that you can't be kicked off your insurance plan for. There's many good things that we can do, so we have to be careful about the people that we let in our marketplace, but I think competition would help.
Mr. Rymer?
Well, healthcare is one of the biggest reasons I threw my hat in the ring. We have 5 full-time employees, W-2 guys at our company, and we looked last year at what it would cost to have a corporate package for 5 employees for health insurance. And the costs were outrageous, and our broker told us that the main reason was because of the MNsure exchanges. Now, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that this is happening. Watching the YouTube videos from past debates that we've had, Paul has actually said in the past 2 that we expect costs to go down. Well, that's obviously not the case, because between 30 to 60% in a premium increase is actually what most middle-class families are facing in Minnesota right now. I think that is a problem. So what I would do is I would completely abandon MNsure in exchange for the federal exchanges, which happen to have better customer service, on average a better savings, and it's not just self-insured people whose insurance is going up.
Thank you. Mr. Rymer, the state of Minnesota has a large achievement gap among different student groups. What do you think the legislature should do to close this gap?
Yeah, it's outstanding what's really happening, especially in Minneapolis and St. Paul. You have people who, and really people of color, who are graduating high school with a 3rd grade reading level. That's an issue. We have great schools here in Edina, Bloomington, and Minnetonka specifically. Minnetonka is doing great, by the way. But we do have an obligation to our friends up 35W in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I'm of the mind that we live in a changing world, and education is changing. So we really should be rethinking the way that we do education. And that comes from having a healthier educational marketplace. That comes from allowing parents to make the best choices for where they should be able to send their kids to go to school, regardless of income level. And it also comes with a focus of technology, which is a staple of my platform, teaching kids, underprivileged kids specifically, how to code. The average developer, the average app developer in the Twin Cities makes about $70,000 per year. I think there's a huge upward mobility to be had within our underprivileged communities to soften that achievement gap.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Sure. You know, the achievement gap is something that we all are very concerned about. And, you know, I served on the Early Childhood Committee, and the younger we get these kids, the better chance they have. And, you know, we did pass all-day kindergarten, which helps, but we need to get them earlier, and we need to do it in a targeted way. I'm not on board with the governor's early childhood, 3 to 4-year-old throughout, but I am for targeted grants to those people that will need it the most, to give them the leg up that the rest of us have gotten. None of us here have gotten here by ourselves. We've all had help along the way, and I think that those kids need our help.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal, this question is on housing. The vacancy rate for affordable housing in the metro area has dropped to 2% or below. What legislation would you support to preserve and increase affordable housing? Mr. Rosenthal.
Sorry, I thought I just finished. That's okay. You know, it's a huge issue. We want our teachers, our police officers, our janitors, our people who work in our district to be able to live in our district. And it's really, really a challenge when you see these buildings going up. So I'd like to see a portion of them, of each building, made affordable. And, you know, one of my proudest moments in the legislature was carrying the Homeless Youth Act. Any night in Edina, in Bloomington, in Minnetonka, in Eden Prairie, there's thousands of kids that are homeless, and that is just shocking. In Edina here, we have the 66 project that's opening up hopefully soon. It's under construction, and it will house and give people the wraparound services that they need. But the more that we price people out of the market, the more, you know, the less diverse and the less vibrant our community becomes.
Mr. Rymer.
Well, I do believe that having a home is part of the American dream, part of the Minnesota dream. What is really interesting is we have some of the lowest home prices right now that we've ever had. We have the lowest interest rates that we've had in a very long time. I can tell you right now, in the 1960s, they would be drooling at a 1% interest rate. This idea that we can kind of legislate houses and permanent homes into affordability is a fallacy. It's a short-term approach to how we legislate. What I believe is that the only way to create more affordable housing is to create more people who can afford homes. And what that means is lowering the corporate tax burden to allow hiring to continue, opening up the market so that people actually have a shot at a good paying job in the state. We do have great unemployment, but we have a really big underemployment problem in this state. And that's gonna come from allowing manufacturers and other good paying jobs to come back and tailing back some of that busybody legislation on our small businesses.
Mr. Rymer, the next question. Over 65% of Minnesotans believe that a mentally able adult should be able to get a prescription for life-ending medication that can be self-administered. Do you agree, and would you support that legislation if it was in effect?
Wow, it's a hard topic. So my wife and I personally believe, and there's this distinction that you need to have between your personal beliefs and how you legislate. I'm a big believer in that. We believe that all life is incredibly valuable. However, we need to take into account a person's personal liberty to make the best choices for their own life. So I find that question very challenging. I would actually say, and this might ruffle some feathers in the room, and that's okay, I would end up supporting legislation like that, because I cannot be the guy to question what somebody does with his or her own life, especially at the end of life when you're facing a number of different challenges.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal?
You know, I tend to agree this is a very tough subject, but it is also one that we're going to be facing more and more as we age. And the gray tsunami is coming. And I've had personal experience with a friend of my mother's in this area. So I do believe if the person is of sound mind and has gone over it with an attorney or somebody in their family to make sure that they knew what they were doing, there was no mental lapses, that I think they should have the right to make that decision.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal, this question is, do you agree or disagree that climate changes are man-made? Why or why not?
Well, I think you can see it all around us every day. I mean, there's hurricanes, there's floods. We've had, I think, in the last 10 years in Minnesota, we've had 700-year floodplains broken. And you see tsunamis all over the place. You see the caps melting. So yes, I think we need to take this seriously, and we need to reduce carbon emissions, and we need to embrace procedures that will keep our environment clean and keep our planet healthy. And so yes, I think it is a real thing, and I will do all I can to fight for it.
Mr. Rymer.
One thing that I really pride myself on is being able to bridge the environmental gap within my own party. What's really interesting is you do have certain people who think that climate change is not man-made or is a fallacy or what have you, but that doesn't give us the excuse to not treat our environment well. So one thing that I've really prided myself on through my time in business and in politics is measuring this balance between treating our small businesses well and rolling back some decent regulations. I definitely believe in that, but I also believe that you don't need to believe that climate change is this man-made thing to be a good steward of your environment. So that's where I fall on the issue. I don't necessarily know a whole lot about climate change, to be completely honest with you, but I do think we have an obligation to be good stewards of our environment.
And Mr. Rymer, you get to answer this question first. Last year, the legislature provided additional funding for small business development and first-time home buyers, many of whom are people of color. Would you support additional funding to address racial disparities in home ownership and small business development?
Yeah, so again, that type of legislation really does feel like a short-term fix instead of addressing the real cause of a certain problem. We've had a real job exodus in this state. You know, we have a lot of minimum wage debates. We have a lot of these debates as to what the actual dollar amount is that people should be earning. So when we talk about these specific grants for specific genders and specific races and specific types of people, I think that actually draws a pretty dark line in the sand about where we're at as a society. What I'd like to see happen is a reversal of a lot of these crushing tax burdens and regulations for small businesses in our state to create opportunity for everybody. To me, anything else seems like a short-term fix instead of a long-term solution, and it's the way that our legislature in Minnesota has operated for a long time, unfortunately. So I would be for long-term business solutions versus short-term kind of injections and legislations depending on what type of person you are.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Last year, the legislature provided additional funding for small business development and first-time home buyers, many of whom are people of color. Would you support additional funding to address racial disparities in home ownership and small business development?
Yes, I would. I think it's crucial. As co-chair of the Bipartisan Small Business Caucus, we look every day to pass bills that help small businesses. And they are the backbone of our economy, and they need any help that we can get. As an example, you know, I am one of the most bipartisan legislators in the House, and I carried a bill co-authored by my co-chair for the Small Business Caucus, Marion O'Neill, and what it did was something that's just common sense. It instead of the department coming and saying, we're here, we're going to audit you, this said that you had to give 3 weeks advance notice so you could get your papers together and get your, if you needed to go to an accountant or anybody else, you had ample time to do that, and didn't take you completely by surprise. So I think working together with both sides of the aisle to help small businesses and help people is a good thing.
May I respond?
Sure.
Thank you. So one thing I find very interesting is things like the Small Business Caucus. I I actually work with business owners every day. I build websites and web-based applications that really make a difference in these small business owners. Specifically, I have 3 clients in the district, and what's really interesting is we can kind of kick the football around in a caucus, but when you talk to real small business owners who face the challenges of meeting payroll every day and that kind of thing, they don't want specific grants, they don't want specific legislation. What they want is for the government to really get off their back and enact the free market to do what it's supposed to do, and that's to create long-term jobs. That's to create real prosperity for people. And we got to get away from this cute legislation and more into the type of long-term business solutions, that being rolling back regulation and crushing tax burdens to allow these businesses to thrive.
Is that Mr. Rosenthal? Do you have any further remarks?
Yeah, I mean, you want to talk about business experience. I was a commercial realtor in New York City for over 16 years. I was vice president of a very large corporation. I ran a distribution company that serviced 200 small green markets in New York City. When I moved here, I opened a small retail business with my wife, which we ran together for 7 years and sold. I currently am self-employed, and just to hear that we don't care or we don't get it, or that you've started all these jobs. You know, I looked at some of these companies, Max. The Edina Foundation doesn't do much, and neither does Something Alchemy. I don't know what they are, but they're on your website, and you're employed by a company, right? So I don't know how you're doing all 3 of these things at the same time. If you are, great, and if you're building those jobs, that's even better. But I think, you know, I have the experience and the expertise and certainly the ear of the business community to help. And I think by your saying that just the same old, it's not the same old. That's why we're working together to try and do new things, not the old things.
There's one part of this question that I don't feel either of you responded to, and that is additional funding from the legislature to basically address racial disparities. Does anybody want to comment on that part of it?
I thought I did address that. I would agree with that.
You did?
And I believe I answered that the first time and said I would not agree with that.
Okay. I'm glad you clarified for me. Thank you. And where are we? Mr. Rymer, the next question is, this proposed constitutional amendment will be on the November 8th ballot. Shall the Minnesota Constitution be amended to remove lawmakers' power to set their own salaries and instead establish an independent citizens-only council to prescribe salaries of lawmakers? What is your position on this amendment?
I tend to agree with that type of legislation. I really think when you're talking about a state legislator specifically, it was originally intended to be, you know, a citizen legislator, someone who's in the community, someone who's active and involved with the people they're actually legislating for. So when we talk about self-prescribed pay raises, I don't necessarily agree that the legislation should or legislators should have power to be able to do that themselves. So I do support that kind of legislation.
Okay, Mr. Rosenthal.
I would certainly vote for that on the ballot. However, I did vote against it because I know what my pay was when I was going in there, and this is going to raise our pay. Legislature hasn't raised their pay since 1999. Why? Because nobody wants to be the one to do it. So, you know, if you want to be honest, keeping it with the legislature would keep our salaries low. Giving it to an independent commission, which is great, I think it should be, our salaries would probably be raised.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal, will you support requiring criminal background checks on every gun sale? Why or why not?
Absolutely, yes. We hear stories every day. We see stories on the news. And I don't understand in a civilized society why we have so many more gun deaths than other westernized countries around the world. So I think background checks make perfect sense. I would like to close the gun hole loophole, and I don't see why, screening people for mental illness or other types of dangers is a bad thing. I think that can only help us and make us safer.
Mr. Rymer?
I do really think there are currently quite a few safeguards in place. I know that the Minnesota legislature has done some work on that, and some good work, I would say. We do have to be very aware of protecting our Second Amendment. It's a fundamental right that we've been given. So in terms of increasing legislation, I would have to see the legislation first is kind of my answer to that.
Thank you. And Mr. Rymer, if you'll answer this question first. What should be done about our crumbling infrastructure, bridges and roads, in light of the bonding bill not passing?
I think it's very unfortunate that it didn't pass, because there was a lot of really good directed funds to making real improvements on our roads and bridges. I think our 35W 494 interchange is a pretty dangerous example of why we really need to focus our transportation funding on roads and bridges first and foremost. So all that to be said, I would support, I don't support like a gas tax increase. I think that's kind of what the question is leaning towards. But I would support using some of our surplus money and existing budgetary measures to address our crumbling infrastructure. Some of our roads and bridges are close to 50 years old, and I think that's unacceptable.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Could you repeat the question exactly, please?
What should be done? What should be done about our crumbling infrastructure, bridges, roads, in light of the bonding bill not passing?
Yeah, it was really, really a shame. This whole year was supposed to be about bonding and getting the funds out to projects that were ready to go. And we spent 4 months hearing bills, and 2 hours before session ended, we saw the bonding bill for the first time. We were huddled out in the hallway trying to figure out what was in it, because no one had seen it. Even the author of the bill was questioned. He didn't know what was in it. We weren't allowed to amend it because the revisers did not have enough time to make amendments so it could be placed into the bill. I ended up voting yes on the bill because I wanted to get as much money into our roads and bridges and infrastructure as possible. Our college campuses need money. They're crumbling too. It's going to cost $600 million just to maintain what we already have. And, I don't know where the money has come from, but I'm certainly willing to work with both sides of the aisle to get there.
And Mr. Rosenthal, the next question. Many employers are reducing employees' hours in order to avoid having to provide health care benefits to these employees. What do you propose can be done to protect the employees?
That's a really tough question, and I certainly, have employed many people in the past, and I would not put my employees in that situation. But it is going on, and I don't know if there's anything the legislature can do about it. I think as a society, we need to look at helping people that need help, and if businesses decide they don't want to treat their employees in a way that is most beneficial to them, so they can have a place that is safe for them to work and they feel comfortable and taken care of, then that's that business's choice. And I think it's the wrong choice, but I think it's up to all of us to help bring everybody up.
Mr. Rymer?
Could you repeat the question?
Many employers are reducing employees' hours in order to avoid having to provide health care benefits. What do you propose can be done to protect these employees?
Well, I do think it's interesting that we're placing the onus on the business right now when there's a reason that they're doing that. So to expect a business to do anything that's not in their own interest and in the interest of growing their own business, they're doing this for a reason. They're doing this because we have a burdensome healthcare system that has actually demonized employers for employing people around 40 hours a week. You know, I know that when you work fast food, they keep your hours intentionally under whatever threshold it is that the government sets, specifically related to healthcare. And, you know, really, I don't know if there's a whole lot that the legislature can do at this point, because we've already gone too far in a lot of these healthcare ventures and putting the burden on small businesses.
Thank you. And Mr. Rymer, is SWLRT, Southwest Light Rail Transit, more or less likely to be built if you are elected? Why or why not?
Well, I would say the answer is neither at this point, because, you know, we had the Met Council who made the decision for us. Isn't that a wonderful thing to have a council of people who are not elected making these types of decisions? So I guess to answer the question, it's neither. Unfortunately, I think that we've kind of overstepped our bounds when it comes to Southwest Light Rail. I think it's going to be a very costly project. And I think there weren't safeguards in place to really monitor the ongoing cost of this thing. Right now, the North Star Rail, we subsidize about $900 per month per rider. What's really interesting about that number is Southwest Light Rail is most likely to be higher than that. So at $900 per month per rider, I think we could affordably lease somebody a Mercedes for every rider that we have on these light rails and address our transportation issue that way.
Mr. Rosenthal?
I do support Southwest Light Rail. I wish it had been done earlier. You know, Denver just built out its transportation system, and we're next in line. And if we lose Southwest, we not only lose other transit lines, we lose funding for roads and bridges as well. So if to lump Southwest into just transit is absolutely wrong. There's more at stake. And if you want to talk about subsidizing, roads and bridges are subsidized very, very highly. I co-authored a bill for the 494 35W first phase of that interchange, which is one of the most dangerous in the country. That alone was $265 million. So to say that $135 million for Southwest, which brings in another $900 million to build out the system from the feds, and then, you know, lose other monies that are available to the state for roads, bridges, and other transit lines, including bus rapid transit, is something I think is too important to give up.
Thank you. And Mr. Rosenthal, do you favor reforming the law to permit state employees to choose not to pay union dues without fear of job loss?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I support unions, and I support chambers of commerce. They do the same thing. All they're doing is advocating for the best deal for their employees, while the chambers are, you know, advocating for the best deal for businesses. So if someone decides that they don't want to be in the union, I guess they have that right, but they're certainly freeloading off some other people that are paying dues. And, you know, I don't think that's right. And so I'll leave it at that.
Mr. Rymer?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
The question is, do you favor reforming the law to permit state employees to choose not to pay union dues without fear of job loss?
Well, I tend to agree with Paul on that one. I absolutely don't think that if you don't want to be part of a union, you shouldn't be able to be part of a union. That type of legislation is called right to work, right? And it's been done in other states. I'm glad to hear that, regardless of who gets elected in November, that Paul or I would support that type of legislation, because I certainly would. I think it's on it's the responsibility of the union then to make sure that they are keeping track of who's actually paying the dues and who might not be, so that they offer benefits and everything else that comes with a union to those folks who are paying the dues. And I think that's totally common sense legislation.
Can I clarify? I am not a right-to-work person or state. You look at Wisconsin, they're drowning. They're doing so much more badly than we are. And, you know, if you don't want to be in a union, don't be in a union. But I certainly support the right to organize and their right to take care of their employees.
Mr. Ryder, do you have any further comment on that, or you're okay?
No.
Okay. And Mr. Ryder, the next question is, what is your position on term limits for state legislators?
Okay. So I certainly support term limits. You know, it's really, it'll be interesting to figure out what that term limit is. But again, I think these positions weren't meant to be careers for people. I think we were meant to be in our community. We were meant to represent our community for a short period of time. And, you know, maybe a good barometer for what the term limit should be is whatever you're sitting at right now, Paul. I would welcome that legislation.
Mr. Rosenthal.
You know, you know, serving in the House is a privilege. It's not a joke, and it's not a cartoon like was sent out by my opponent against me. I do believe in term limits. I did not expect to even ever be in the legislature, and it's a really, really hard burden on your family and your kids, and you give up a lot to be there. So I would like to serve 1, 2 at the most terms, and then move away and let Max or whoever it is that's there take over. I do believe I'm in that sweet spot, and where I've had the learning curve, and I'm in that spot where I get along with the other side of the aisle, that I can do the best for our community right now. And there is a learning curve, and you lose a lot of institutional knowledge if you only serve 2 years or 4 years. So, you know, I would say 10 years is probably right, and I'll probably only serve 8.
Thank you. Mr. Rosenthal, there's a proposed, it's called CHEER Act, that would ensure that health plans offering drug coverage would also have to cover contraceptives. There is an exemption for religious institutions. If elected, would you support this act? Why or why not?
Yes.
Mr. Rymer?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
There is a proposed act that would ensure that health plans offering drug coverage would also have to cover contraceptives. There is an exemption for religious institutions. If elected, would you support this act?
So to be clear, this is the government mandating that a private insurer of a business would have to insure one thing or the other. Now, I'm totally against that. I think that the market should really determine what kind of coverage you get, what kind of business should offer which kind of insurance. And if businesses want to provide contraceptive care to their employees, I think that's totally within their right to do so. But I also think that depending on the health plan that you choose, you shouldn't need to cover contraceptives. It should really be an a la carte type of choice, and I don't think legislation would effectively address that issue.
Thank you. Mr. Rymer, what will driverless Uber cars do to Southwest Light Rail Transit?
Driverless Uber cars.
Can you repeat the question?
What will driverless Uber cars do to the Southwest Light Rail Transit?
Okay, so that's a non sequitur, so I'm just going to talk about something else for a little while. No, I do think that ride-sharing programs are a really effective way to address our transportation issue. I mentioned that specifically on my website. In terms of what it would do directly to Southwest Light Rail, I think the answer is nothing directly, unless somebody's driverless Uber car drives onto Southwest Light Rail and a train crashes into it. At that point, we have a little bit of an issue. But when we do address our transportation issue, one thing that I make mention of is I think future-mindedness in how we address transportation is very important. So I do think ride-sharing programs, I do think actually a lot of studies have come out that commercial drone transportation is going to be viable. These are things that I would like as part of maybe an emerging technology subcommittee to look into and address.
And Mr. Rosenthal.
Now I'm totally confused because first I heard Uberless driver's car, then Max was talking about Southwest. So could you repeat the question?
Well, the question as written is, what will driverless Uber cars do to the Southwest Light Rail Transit?
Nothing. If you drive 62, whether you're an Uberless car or you're an Uber 4 car, you're still stuck in traffic, and that's the bottom line. And you know, I don't know, but I go to St. Paul a lot, and no matter what time of day, you go on 494, there's no way you're getting past France Avenue within 45 minutes. 62 is blacked up almost every time of the day. And when they did the Chamber of Commerce, all major businesses are in support of Southwest Light Rail for a very good reason. They want very good employees, and they want them to be able to get there safely, cheaply, and efficiently. So, the sense of, I have no problem with driverless cars, but I think that's not going to solve the problem.
Thank you very much. We're at the end of our questions, and we have a little bit more time, so it is time for the closing statements. And initially, you were scheduled to have 1.5 minutes, and I think we could spread that to 2 minutes if you have more to say. And so, Mr. Rymer, you get to go first.
Very good. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. These things are a lot of fun for me, and as I'm on the campaign trail, I think we have a future-minded message that's resonating with a lot of folks in the district. It's been very fun to door knock and get to know the community that I'm part of. To address a couple things, Digital Alchemy LLC, that's something that you can look at on the Secretary of State website. The Edina Foundation, we gave away $5,000 in scholarships over the past 2 years. Please go to edinaprofessionals.org/Edina Charities, and you can see all of our good work is right there for you. And Bird Dog LLC, if you go to, right now we have a landing page up. We're working on securing a round of funding. So one thing that's really interesting is where do I do this and how do I have time to do this is, I'm kind of masochistic in a way that I really lack sleep, but I really like being a part of a lot of different things. I like being involved in the community. I like enriching people's lives, and I really like giving people the tools to succeed with upward mobility. And I think we have a number of innovative ideas to bring this to St. Paul and beyond. And I'm really excited to get to November and represent the people of 49B in a fiscally conservative, fiscally responsible way, but then also a way that encourages people of my generation to have good upward mobility in their job prospects, and have our retirees have a place that they can live and retire safely with an income that isn't being rated by our state government. So I'm really, really excited to represent you guys. I don't know if you can tell, I'm kind of a high energy guy. I understand this is a very serious position. I'm a very serious guy in a lot of senses, but if you're not having fun doing this thing, what are you doing it for? So my name is Max Rymer. Visit maxforhouse.com. Check out some of my issue platforms, but I think we have a few more of these debates coming up. So thank you guys for coming out. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. Have a good night.
And Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you, first of all, for coming out tonight. Thank you to the League. Thank you, Max, for coming. We do have a lot of fun in the legislature, believe it or not, and 99% of the time we get along with each other and we pass bills together. And to me, that's the most important thing, is working together to solve problems. And, my bills, the vast majority of them have Republican co-authors. And I do that for a reason. It's because we can work together from the start And the people that are on the fringes that think they know everything about every subject, and believe me, they do, on both sides of the aisle, and they'll talk forever, they're not getting us anywhere. So we need people that are serious, that are experienced, that have had the business and the nonprofit life like I have. And, you know, I'm not in this for any other reason that I want to help us be the best state we can be. And I'm doing it for my kids, Jack and Eddie, who are in the audience tonight. I didn't expect them. They should be doing their homework. You know, this is a serious job, and it's supposed to be a part-time legislature. I could fill every hour of every day with something year-round if I didn't have some self-control. And, you know, I'm a moderate. I like to get things done. So that means taking the hand, giving a little bit here, taking a little bit there, and get in the room and get it done. And this session was a big failure, and it was something that I've never witnessed anything like it. We were called in at 9 o'clock in the last morning, last day of session. We haven't seen a bonding bill yet, but we're told we're going to come in at 9, then 10, then 11, then 3, then 8, and then we finally came in at 9 at night, and we're handed a 600-page bill. So I'm for transparency in government. I'm for a law that could have been passed this last session, where we need to see a bill for 24 hours so people can actually see what's in the bill. And I'm very excited to get into this next session and continue to help the state of Minnesota and our community here in 49B. And I ask for your vote on November 8th.
Thank you, candidates, for participating in this forum. And for your willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for office. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Edina, to Jewish Community Action, and to the National Council of Jewish Women Minneapolis chapter for sponsoring this forum. This forum has been taped for broadcast on Edina Community Channel 16. The rebroadcast schedule has been distributed to the live audience and is available online. The forum will also be available for viewing through the League of Women Voters Edina website. It will also be on the City of Edina's website and on YouTube. Thank you for attending tonight's forum. Please remember to vote on Tuesday, November 8th, and this concludes the forum. Good night.